major quote-unquote jobs of an insect is to pass their genes on to the next generation. We call this the biological imperative. They do this through reproduction. So we looked at the anatomy of reproduction last time, remember that? And we also looked at some of the strategies, those crazy strategies that insects can use to ensure it's their genes that are actually passed on to that next generation rather than a rival's genes. So now we're going to look at the different types of reproduction and the different types of development over the next several videos. Okay. There are 3 major types of reproduction out in the world across all animals. The first we call oviparous. So oviparous is an egg-bearing strategy. This is when a female produces an egg, lays it in the environment, and that egg hatches into a young thing. So we see this a lot in insects. The insect female will lay an egg, leave it in the environment, and it will hatch into a young insect. So this is the most common type of insect reproduction out there. Now, in this case, the majority of embryonic development of the young happens outside of the mother, happens inside an eggshell out in the environment. We call this type of investment in the next generation an R strategy. So R strategists create an abundance of offspring and then hope that a few are going to make it. The offspring tend to have a very short maturation time. So they don't spend a lot of time in the young stage. The adults will breed at a very young age, and overall their lifespan is really short. So this is going to result in the creation of many offspring very quickly. A lot of these offspring have very high mortality rates. So in this type of reproductive strategy, they're focusing on quantity over quality. In this case, we see lots and lots of eggs, hundreds upon hundreds of young being produced, and a small percentage of those are actually going to make it. There are a few R strategists that will invest in their offspring just a little bit. So they're trying to up the likelihood that their offspring are going to survive. They do this through engaging in some sort of post-oviposition care that we call egg tending. This is when males or females will stick around, hang out with their eggs, and make sure that they hatch. So there are some insects like this bellistomatid that's up here. These insects will actually take the eggs and glue them to their back and then just carry them around. This is going to keep the eggs safe, keep them safe from predators, from parasites, that sort of thing. Other insects will create little nests for their eggs, and they'll stay and fight off predators or parasites. So this type of behavior can increase the survivorship of the eggs significantly over time. A second type of reproductive strategy is the K strategist, or the viviparous strategist. So in vivipary, the embryonic development happens inside the mother without an egg at all. So the female will lay down a live offspring in that case. So humans are viviparous organisms. So this K strategy, these strategists will produce fewer offspring and provide more parental care in an attempt to ensure the survival of the offspring. So the quantity of the offspring is very low, but the quality is very high. So it's quality over quantity in this strategy. You have very few or relatively few offspring over the course of a lifetime, but there's a lot of investment in those offspring. The young can't usually survive on their own until adulthood, and they have a relatively long lifespan. So there's much lower mortality rates due to this extensive parental care. Now, a third type of reproductive strategy is called Ovoviviparous. So it's a cross between this oviparous and viviparous, this egg-bearing and this live-bearing strategy. In this case, the female is going to produce an egg, but she's going to retain that egg internally until it hatches. So instead of laying an egg or ovipositing, she is going to lay down larvae or larvaposit in the environment. It's this kind of strategy kind of bridges this oviparous and viviparous, gives a little bit more young tending and requires a little bit more input from the adult. Now, once an insect is oviposited or larviposited into the world, it needs to change and it needs to grow until it can send its own genes onto that next generation. Most insects undergo changes in shape or form or size during their development. This change we call metamorphosis. And a dramatic example of this change is happening in this video right in the center here. This is a cicada, and it is coming out of its exuvia, which I'll explain to you in just a minute. How awesome is that? So, metamorphosis in insects. This is defined as a change in form resulting from normal development. All insects will start out as an egg some way. These eggs are usually laid in the environment. That's that R strategy that we just talked about. Those that remain in the female are laid down as larvae or nymphs or pupae. No matter what happens, the young insects will emerge from the eggs into the immature stage. This immature stage can be in the form of larvae, can be in the form of nymphs, or in the form of naiads. So larvae, nymphs, or naiads. And this just depends on the type of development that the insect exhibits and the type of species that we are looking at. Once the immature insect is in the environment, it begins to feed and it begins to grow. Growth is represented by the synthesis of new tissue. So the insect needs to intake energy in the form of food, and it's accompanied by cell division and cell differentiation. So it takes that energy from the food and turns it into tissue. This is what we call growth. So the young insect needs to grow and it needs to develop quite a bit to reach its fully mature adult stage. Now, since an insect has an exoskeleton, remember we talked about this, the growing insect has to molt the old exoskeleton and replace it with a larger one. The old exoskeleton is called the exuvia. So this exuvia is left in the environment, and the new insect, the newly molted insect, is going to expand into its new integument or its new skin. That new skin, that new integument is going to tan and it's going to sclerotize. So sclerotinization occurs, which turns it into that new hardened exoskeleton. After several molts of this type, the insect reaches its mature or its adult stage. This mature stage is characterized by mature reproductive organs. After this, very, very few insects are actually going to continue to molt. Most of them are going to hit this adult stage and just stop molting. Now, there are three major types of metamorphosis based on if an insect forms a pupae or not, or if the insect goes through a dramatic change in its life cycle or not. The first is characterized by no real change. We call this a metabolous. The second is characterized by a very slight change from young to adult. It's known as incomplete metamorphosis. We call this either hemimetabolous or parometabolous, depending on where the young spend the majority of their life. Finally, the last is characterized by a complete change between young and adult stages. We call this holometabolous or complete metamorphosis. So no metamorphosis, incomplete metamorphosis, and complete metamorphosis. Ametabolous, hemi or parometabolous, and holometabolous. All right, now that you have a general idea of these different types of metamorphosis, we're going to spend the next video going over each one of these in great depth. Let me know if you have any questions.